The development of the automobile built upon the transport revolution started by railways. And like the railways, introduced sweeping changes in employment patterns, social interactions, infrastructure and goods distribution. The automobile is one of those inventions that can be credited to many different inventors. The first horseless carriages, as these vehicles were known in the 18th and 19th century, were propelled by steam, the high-tech propulsion method of its day. Over the course of the 20th century, the automobile rapidly developed from an expensive toy for the rich into the de facto standard for passenger transport in most developed countries. Rich people rode, poor people walked. Horses, carriages, bicycles and cars. That's the way it was. Since the earliest days, motoring has never been exactly cheap. At first it was only the wealthy and the brave who could afford to dispense with their horse-drawn carriages and take up with the infernal combustion engine. But transport continued to be defined by money. The wealthy rode or flew, the poor walked or pedalled. Then Mr. Ford came along and revolutionized the world. He drove the first Ford car in 1896 and started building the iconic Model T in 1908. He doubled wages, gaining the expertise of the best mechanics. He invented the moving production line, and he forced down the cost of entry into motorcar ownership. The first Tin Lizzies cost $825, but 8 years later, the price was $360. By 1918, over half the cars in America were Model Ts, and when production stopped in 1927, over 15 million had been built, a record which stood for over 45 years.
The cars began coming off the assembly line at the rate of 1 every 40 seconds.
By 1932, Ford was manufacturing 1/3 of all the world's cars. One Boston motor car dealer was heard to suggest that the Model T was invented to keep poor people out of good cars. In reality, the Model T made motoring accessible to the masses and made the exotic machines of the wealthy attainable to anybody who worked hard, married well, or got lucky. Henry Ford was once quoted as saying that the Model T would be available in any colour you like, so long as it's black. Europe wasn't lagging behind America, although none of the car makers there managed to rival Ford's remarkable influence on mainstream American culture. Louis Renault was the youngest of 5 children in a wealthy French family. After his army service, he built a 4-wheeled small car equipped with one of his inventions, a 3-speed gearbox with reverse. The versatile car, the Renault Type A, made Louis Renault a manufacturer. When he won a bet with friends that it could drive up a steep street in Montmartre, he received 12 orders for the car. In 1905, Renault became a mass producer, with an order of 250 taxicabs. In 2 years, there were more than 1,500 Renault taxis on the streets of Paris, and more were exported to London, New York, and Buenos Aires. In contrast, Citroën came along much later, 1919, but founder André Citroën had previously made gears and hand grenades during World War I. He was greatly influenced by Henry Ford's production methods, and in 1934, Citroëns were among the first front-wheel drive cars.
The 1948 model was not much
très
praised by the
favorable de la
specialised
presse.
press.
La presse spécialisée qui se dit, mais
They said, "What kind of car is this? It's grey. It's really weird." It's true that it was sort of a UFO in the car industry at the time.
It was at the Paris Motor Show in 1948 that Citroën first introduced their low-cost car. For almost half a century, the 2CV revolutionised the French car industry and became a major part of the country's culture and way of life. The first 2CV was created in 1939, right before the Second World War, but only made its public debut in Paris. It was the oddest car ever presented at the show. It had only one headlight, no starter motor, and very loose suspension, which made it jump on bumps. It looked more like a tin can than a car. The 2CV was very cheap and designed for the countryside. Originally, it was made to replace a farmer's horse and cart. This meant the car was solid, almost indestructible, and able to transport 4 people and a crate of eggs across a freshly ploughed field without breaking the eggs. Its cheapness and practicality appealed to low-income families who could finally afford to buy a car. So the public responded well, and very soon, 2 years after its introduction, there was a waiting list of 2 years to get one. Altogether, more than 5 million 2CVs were produced. But in 1989, production stopped in France. 1 year later, in July 1990, the only remaining production line in Portugal also stopped. The British motor industry started when Frederick Sims bought the rights to his friend Gottlieb Daimler's engine in 1893 and founded the Daimler Motor Syndicate to build motorized boats. In 1895, Henry Lawson bought Sims' interest in the engine, realizing its potential for land use. Vehicle development in the UK was hard because 19th century laws, known as the Red Flag Act, restricted the use of mechanically propelled vehicles on the public road. A man with a red flag had to walk ahead and warn people, especially those with horses, that a motorized carriage was coming, effectively limiting the car's speed to a walk and therefore much slower than a horse-drawn carriage. In 1895, as one of many attempts to promote his schemes, Lawson and Frederick Sims founded the Motor Car Club of Britain. He and the club organised the first London to Brighton Emancipation Run in November 1896 to celebrate the relaxation of the Red Flag Act, marking the start of a motor industry in Britain. Early British vehicles relied on developments from Germany and France, but by 1900, the first all-British four-wheel car was designed and built by the Wolseley Sheep Shearing Company, later the Wolseley Motor Company in Birmingham. Herbert Austin had lived and worked in Australia for 9 years, transferring back to the UK with the company. He remained on the board until 1933. In 1905, Austin resigned from the Wolseley Tool and Motor Company, taking some of the senior staff with him. And in 3 years, Austin was producing 17 different models. By 1913, Henry Ford had built a new factory in Manchester and was the leading UK producer, building over 7,000 cars that year. Roads quickly overflowed and the dream of effortless personal transport dissolved into a reality we still have today, the traffic jam, car production just about stopped during World War I as industry geared up for the war effort, employing women in large numbers for the first time. Austin's company focused on the war effort, and in 1917 he was knighted and also received the Belgian Order of the Crown of Leopold II for employing 3,000 Belgian refugees at his factory. The car business was difficult after World War I. Austin was close to bankruptcy in 1921, and a receiver was appointed. The baby Austin was launched in 1922 and offered for sale at £225, putting it within reach of customers who had never previously owned a car. Its output reached 25,000 annually by 1925. The price was reduced each year. In 1922, there were 183 motor companies in the UK. Yet, by 1929, following the slump years, there were only 58. In 1929, the big names were Morris, founded by William Morris in 1910, and Austin. Between them, they built 60% of the cars in Britain. In 1932, Britain passed France as Europe's largest car producer, a position it held until 1955. In 1937, the UK produced nearly 500,000 vehicles, but the Great Depression of the 1930s virtually halved demand for vehicles, and thousands of jobs were lost. Modelled on the vast factories built by Ford and General Motors in Detroit, the British car makers had huge workforces. At least the British had exports to former colonies in the Commonwealth to prop up production. Even the mighty Bentley, so beloved of wealthy playboys and aristocratic amateur racers, couldn't weather the storm. Despite winning the iconic Le Mans 24-hour race, Bentley was sold to the even more elegant Rolls-Royce company. For years, a Bentley was just a slightly cheaper version of a Rolls-Royce. But at least the badge survived. Many did not. Over in Germany, where the very first car was built by Carl Benz in 1885, another people's car was to rise from the ashes of the Second World War, the Volkswagen. Unkindly called the Beetle because of its shape, the name stuck, and the rear-engine car became an icon for a generation. It was designed by an engineer whose next project would make his name revered by enthusiasts around the world. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche. His sports cars would dominate racing and define luxury high-performance driving for decades. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Volkswagen advertising campaigns and a reputation for reliability and sturdiness helped Beetle sales figures to rocket up. In 1972, production passed the level of the previous record holder, the Ford Model T, and by 1992, over 21 million Beetles had been produced. Beetles were built in Ireland, Thailand, Indonesia, South Africa, Australia and Nigeria, as well as huge numbers in Mexico and Brazil. In 1962, a slightly modified Beetle set a new record for driving around Australia. The Beetle is popular with customers throughout the world, not only because it's cheap and easy to work on, but because the body can be personalised or even removed entirely to make sun-loving beach buggies and off-road races. A whole generation, thousands of racing drivers started their quest to reach Formula One in single-seated Formula V races using Beetle engines, wheels, brakes and suspension. Another German manufacturer that was resurrected from the ruins of World War II was NSU, who built motorcycles and scooters and made the natural progression to small lightweight cars. The Prince was built in large numbers between 1957 and 1973. The early cars were noisy and slow, but improvements were made throughout the Prince's 16-year life cycle. In the earliest days, roads were places that horses hauled carts. But as more and more cars came along, so did road construction gangs, roadworks, road closures, and chaos on the roads. From packed earth to hand-laid wooden blocks, cobblestones to concrete, and eventually poured and rolled hot mix, a byproduct of making petrol, roads became more durable. Vehicle makers rose to the challenge and soon realised that driving all the wheels was the most efficient way of moving their machines. The first four-wheel drive was made in Amsterdam in 1903, but some car drivers wanted to go further than the roads permitted, and in weather that would defeat most cars, so owners had their vehicles fitted with skis and moving link tracks like chains that became common on military and earth-moving machines. One of the first four-wheel drive systems was designed for a steam engine, before cars were even invented. But the robust all-wheel drive truck built by Marmon Harrington was quickly adapted to military use. Explorers and commercial interests saw improved all-terrain vehicles as the way to conquer vast and inhospitable areas like the Sahara Desert. Caravans of camels would soon be sharing the desert with convoys of wheeled vehicles. Though the camels would sometimes be needed to free vehicles trapped by the shifting sands. If necessity is the mother of invention, then warfare is its father. All it takes for technology to make huge leaps is a war. And the world of automobiles is no different. The Second World War spawned what is now known as the Jeep. Although no one's really certain what the name came from an abbreviation of general purpose to an internal Ford naming system in early 1941, Willys proved the vehicle's off-road capability by having it driven up the steps of the United States Capitol by a test driver who heard soldiers calling it a Jeep. Small, rugged, cheap, and seemingly indestructible, it prompted dozens of imitators and variations from just about every manufacturer. Even once the war was over, vehicle development continued, with trucks being made to carry more load over rougher ground and at higher speeds. The British Army even experimented with a gas turbine-powered armoured vehicle and weren't shy about demonstrating what their fighting machines could do. So too the Americans, keen to find out just how far these rugged, all-terrain runabouts could be pushed, and all in the complete absence of any kind of driver protection or safety equipment. And after the war, when there were lots of surplus Jeeps left at the end of hostilities, keen drivers did what comes naturally. They raced them. This is probably the only time in motorsport where a dog is allowed to be carried as a passenger, and where you are encouraged to soak your rivals. Even with humans aboard, the result is the same, as drivers tackle tough terrain in their rugged little ex-army surplus vehicles. Modern developments have seen the switch from combustion to electric engines. One concept is the Twizy, which boasts a flowery exterior and a futuristic cockpit, full wheel covers, pearlescent white paint, and luminous matrix displays that act as headlights and taillights, and can create smileys to tell other drivers what you think of them. An urban vehicle for city dwellers, The Twizy, 2.3 metres long and 1.13 metres wide, and carries 2 people in tandem. Power comes from a small 15 kilowatt electric motor connected to lithium-ion batteries under the seats, giving the 420 kilogram Twizy the performance of a 125cc motorbike with a range of 100 kilometres and a top speed of 75 kilometres an hour. There are no doors, but the whole body of the Twizy acts as a safety cell, and there are side airbags. The Zoe ZE concept targets motorists who own more than one car and who are looking for a compact electric vehicle capable of meeting day-to-day needs, such as the school or work run. Like most concept cars, Zoe has some odd touches. A L'Oreal button injects soothing particles into the cabin to hydrate the 4 occupants' skin, and its interior can change colour. Zoe is 4.1 metres long, rides on 21-inch wheels, and is powered by a 70 kilowatt electric motor. In Renault's view of the electric car world, the driver has 3 options when it comes to filling up on energy. A standard charge takes between 4 and 8 hours via a charging socket on the outside of the vehicle. A quick charge in 20 minutes using the same socket at specific charging points or their exclusive quick drop system. 3 minutes at a rapid battery exchange station. Renault has put 4 electric concept cars on the menu in recent years, vehicles it intends to bring to full production by 2012. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievement. The early days of powered flight were filled with exhilaration and peril. Technology advanced with astounding speed, from wooden struts and bicycle wheels to jet engines in less than half a century. Air travel brought continents together and opened a world of possibilities. The story of aviation is about the mechanics, the pilots, the inventors, and the thrill seekers. It's a story of ingenuity and perseverance, of a dream that refused to die. The early years of the 20th century were a time of discovery and wonder in the world of aviation. People watched in awe as pilots entered a domain previously reserved for birds. With courage, skill, and sheer bravado, pioneer aviators notched up a long line of record-breaking flights using innovative technology that still astounds today. The men and women present at the birth of aviation continue to inspire. Ignoring the naysayers, they risked their lives to bring us the magic of flight. In the early days of aviation, there was no limit to the imagination of some inventors. Not all prototypes were successful, but it was only a matter of time before mankind spread its wings and launched into the sky. A French sea captain who experimented with gliders in the mid-19th century wrote, "In spite of me, it drew forward into the wind. Notwithstanding my resistance, it tended to rise. Thus I've discovered the secret of the bird, and I comprehend the whole mystery of flying." It was a mystery that obsessed ancient travellers who dreamed of voyaging in winged contraptions. Elaborate designs document this desire, transforming man into bird with the addition of sail-like wings. Not surprisingly, the prototypes never flew, but each added to the sum of human knowledge. Artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci was the most famous early aircraft designer. The medieval polymath drew up blueprints for many inventions in his meticulously detailed diaries, including a helicopter and a hang glider. Da Vinci was particularly fascinated with birds, producing a study in 1505 called Codex on the Flight of Birds, in which he noted that the centre of gravity in a flying bird did not coincide with its centre of pressure. The Codex also included several flying machine designs, but when the great inventor built them, they failed to launch. Da Vinci was a man far ahead of his time. His paper designs highlight his incredible scientific skills and ability to think in 3 dimensions. As well as flying machines, Da Vinci designed a giant parachute, foreshadowing a technology that was still 200 years away from becoming a reality. In 1783, in front of the French royal family, a balloon designed by the Montgolfier brothers made the first recorded manned flight. The English, a haughty nation, arrogate to themselves the empire of the sea. The French, a buoyant nation, make themselves masters of the air, said the future Louis XVIII. Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier were from a family of paper manufacturers. They shrewdly married solid engineering principles with beautiful design, making their balloon ascents an eye-catching experience. The Montgolfier prototype balloon was made from paper lined with alum for fireproofing and held together by 2,000 buttons. The sight of humans sailing through the air was remarkable enough to 18th century Parisians. But to add to the wonder, the Montgolfier brothers commissioned their balloon to be an artwork. The beauty of balloons drifting through the air was undeniable, but it was a dangerous pastime. In 1785, Pierre Roman and Jean-François de Rosier became the first people to die in a ballooning accident when they crashed to Earth in a hydrogen-fueled fire. 12 years later, Frenchman André-Jacques Garnerin became the first person to make a successful parachute descent from a balloon. His canvas umbrella contraption brought him safely to Earth from a height of 3,000 feet. Ballooning technology continued to improve, with aeronauts turning to rubber-coated silk as the material of choice. Slung beneath the huge envelope in a wicker gondola, pilots added hydrogen to the envelope to ascend. As hydrogen is lighter than air, the gas displaced air molecules and lifted the balloon higher. To descend, the pilots simply opened valves and released hydrogen. Balloon ascents were a popular spectator sport in the 19th century, but some balloonists raised the ire of farmers whose crops were trampled by people eager to get close to a landing. In 1873, French aeronaut Jules Dufour and his wife made an unscheduled landing into stormy seas when their craft, the Neptune, was swept out over the ocean. Fortunately, fishermen rescued them. A talented scientist, Dufour invented a scheme to steer balloons using sails and drag ropes, paving the way for future experiments in controlled flight. Artists of the 19th century looked to the future and came up with their own versions of flying machines. And the military found new uses for balloons, with Thaddeus Lowe carrying out reconnaissance in a Union Army balloon during the American Civil War. One man who observed the fascinating spectacle was a visitor from Germany, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. Early aeronauts were at the mercy of air currents, with ascending and descending the only part of the flight they could control. After observing the first balloon ascension, American scientist and statesman Benjamin Franklin wrote to his friend Sir Joseph Banks, "These machines must always be driven by the winds. Perhaps mechanic art may find easy means to give them progressive motion." By the mid-19th century, aeronautical inventors were closing in on the technology that would provide progressive motion. In 1852, Henry Giffard flew the first flight of a steerable balloon, managing 17 miles at a top speed of 5 miles an hour. However, the craft's steam-powered engine was too slow to control the vehicle. Alberto Santos Dumont demonstrated the maneuverability of airships by taking his gasoline-powered craft on a flight around the Eiffel Tower, for which he was awarded the Deutsch Prize in 1901. German army officer Count von Zeppelin was determined to put Germany at the forefront of airship development. He used his own money to build the Luftschiff Zeppelin, or LZ-1. Powered by twin Daimler motors, it flew for 20 minutes on July 2, 1900. It was the beginning of an era of glory for German aviation. Zeppelin's inventions inspired public support, and he was able to finance future airships through donations and a lottery. But like all aviators of the era, Zeppelin struggled to keep his monster airship under control. In 1908, his Zeppelin LZ-4 was caught in a storm and crashed, injuring 4 people. The disaster virtually bankrupted the Count, but with public support he persevered with his airship program and went on to greater things. Lawrence Hargrave emigrated to Australia from England as a 15-year-old with his family. He worked as an engineer and an astronomical observer before inheriting his father's fortune and devoting his life to aeronautical research. On the 12th of November 1894, at Stanwell Park Beach near Sydney, Hargrave used 4 box kites tied together to lift himself from the ground. He ascended 16 feet in a wind speed of 21 miles per hour. Aviators looking to improve the lift-to-drag ratio of early gliders eagerly followed Hargrave's breakthrough. A pioneer who used both kites and airships in an innovative way was photographer George Lawrence. Lawrence designed his own panoramic cameras and used a string of 7 kites to hoist the equipment aloft, from where it took images of the Earth up to 2,000 feet above the ground. Lawrence activated the camera shutters by sending an electrical current through the kite's strings. When the shutter released, a small parachute fluttered down, signaling that the photo had been taken and the camera could be brought down and reloaded. But it was 2 brothers from Midwestern America who were to have the greatest impact on the world of aviation. Wilbur and Orville Wright grew up in Dayton, Ohio, towards the end of the 19th century. Orville was the more mechanically minded of the 2, while Wilbur loved the intellectual stimulation of study. Their mother, Susan, taught Orville and Wilbur how to make their own inventions. Aged 8 and 12, the boys were given a toy helicopter powered with a rubber band. The toy broke, so they built their own. There were 5 children in the family, but Orville and Wilbur were particularly close. Wilbur later wrote, "From the time we were little children, my brother Orville and myself lived together, played together, worked together, and in fact thought together. We usually owned all of our toys in common, talked over our thoughts and aspirations, so that nearly everything that was done in our lives has been the result of conversations, suggestions and discussions between us. As young men, the brothers opened their own bicycle sales and repair shop. The business proved profitable. America was in the grip of a cycling craze, and the Wright brothers designed and manufactured some popular bicycles. The business provided funds for the brothers to indulge in their real passion, aviation. Their sister Catherine took over the business, so Orville and Wilbur could devote more and more time to designing flying machines. Wilbur came up with a plan to use cables to draw the struts and spars of a glider together. Unlike other aeroplane prototypes, the pilot would actually have control. The brothers' initial interest in aviation had been sparked by the achievements of inventors such as Otto Lilienthal. The German gliding enthusiast made several flights, but constantly battled with the tendency of his gliders to pitch down, a characteristic that killed him in 1896 when he fell 17 meters and broke his spine. The Wright brothers agreed with Lilienthal. The gliding experience was the best way to develop flying techniques that could be used with powered flight. But the poor lift of the gliders led them to suspect that the equation being relied on by Lilienthal and others was wrong. Their own experiments confirmed this, So they built a 6-foot wind tunnel to test various sized wings and balance lift against drag. In this way, they discovered that long, narrow wings provided a far better lift-to-drag ratio than the broader wings used previously. Through trial and error, Wilbur and Orville progressed from flying the glider as a kite to manned flights. The 1902 glider contained a movable rear rudder connected to the wing warping system, controlled by a hip cradle. With the problem of pilot control finally solved, the brothers were ready to add power. On the 23rd of March 1903, they applied for a patent for their flying machine. The biggest problem was finding an engine light enough for the glider. None of the manufacturers the Wrights contacted were able to make one to their specifications. So the brothers decided to make their own. Their shop mechanic, Charlie Taylor, took just 6 weeks to build the lightweight aluminium design. On the 17th of December 1903, they put their powered glider to the test. On the 17th of December 1903, they put their powered glider to the test. The wind was gusting at 30 miles an hour, and they were flying into a stiff wind. Orville took off, and in 40 feet he was off the ground. At that same moment, John Daniels took the historic, famous photograph. The plane in the stiff wind proved difficult for Orville to fly, but he was determined to stay in the air as long as he could. He was in the air for 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds later, 120 feet from the starting point. Orville landed the plane at the number 1 stone marker. It was only 12 seconds, 120 feet, but that was the first time man was able to break those bonds with the Earth with a powered flyer. Orville and Wilbur later wrote, "We realized the difficulties of flying in so high a wind, but estimated that the added dangers in flight would be partly compensated for by the slower speed in landing." The brothers made 3 more flights, with Wilbur piloting the flyer more than 800 feet. Unfortunately, when they put the machine down to take a rest, a gust of wind blew it over and smashed it beyond repair. It never flew again. But Orville and Wilbur had already flown into the history books. For the next 2 years, they refined their designs until developing the Flyer 5, the first aircraft able to take off and land under pilot control. The patent the brothers took out in 1906 covered the method of varying wing angle to control an aircraft, and they fought several court battles against other aviators who incorporated this into their aircraft design without paying royalties. The brothers negotiated successful contracts with a French syndicate and the American Army, and gave public flights around the world to publicize their aircraft. Other aviators, including Louis Blériot, were awestruck by the Wright brothers' ability to control the aeroplanes. But although Orville and Wilbur had made great progress in aeronautical design, flying was still a perilous business. On the 17th of September 1908, Orville took Army Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge as his passenger on a flight at a United States Army base at Fort Myer, Virginia. The propeller split in mid-flight, and the Wright flyer plummeted to the ground, killing Selfridge and badly injuring Orville. Typically, Orville's main concern was not of going back into the air, but whether he would recover in time to complete the Army test flights. Sadly, the Wright brothers' collaboration came to an end in 1912, when Wilbur died of typhoid, aged just 45. At the Smithsonian Institution, an inscription says of the pair, "By original scientific research, the Wright brothers discovered the principles of human flight. As inventors, builders, and flyers, they further developed the aeroplane, taught man to fly, and opened the era of aviation." Well north of Kill Devil Hill, on the remote banks of the Lake of Gold in Nova Scotia, Scottish-born inventor Alexander Bell was carrying out his own aeronautical experiments at his Canadian estate. The inventor of the telephone, Dr. Bell, was fascinated by aviation and became a founding member of the Aerial Experiment Association in 1907, together with Glenn Curtis, Casey Baldwin, J.A.D. McCurdy, and Thomas Selfridge. In 1908, the association launched Red Wing, its first heavier-than-air machine, with Casey Baldwin at the controls. It crashed on the first flight and they moved on to White Wing and then Junebug, which Curtiss successfully flew a distance of 5,090 feet. On the 23rd of February 1909, McCurdy took off from the frozen lake to pilot the association's most ambitious craft, Silver Dart, on the first powered aircraft flight in Canadian history. Like the Junebug, the Silver Dart's V8 engine was designed by Curtiss, but the lightweight design attracted the ire of the Wright brothers, who sued him for infringing their patent. After several appeals, the Wrights finally won their case in 1913. A motorcycle manufacturer, Glenn Curtiss, was one of America's most important aeronautical designers and pilots. The winner of many air races, Curtiss became closely involved in designing aircraft for the American military, and he was a pioneer in the design and manufacture of seaplanes and flying boats. He also developed the first aircraft to take off from a ship. A pilot of considerable skill, Curtiss had the honor of becoming the first person to receive a pilot's license from the Aero Club of America in 1911. When the world went to war in 1914, few traditional military men saw the potential of flying machines. But one who did was Italian officer Giulio Douay. "A new weapon has come forth," he said. "The sky has become the new battlefield." It wasn't long before rapid strides in aviation technology were proving him right. The previous century, Thaddeus Lowe's balloon had provided reconnaissance information for the Union forces during the Civil War. Now a new breed of aircraft was taking to the skies loaded with deadly weapons. Still just flimsy scraps of wood and fabric, the first generation of fighter aeroplanes were nevertheless fast and maneuverable, but their effectiveness depended on a new breed, the fighter pilot. Keen eyesight, stamina, and fast reflexes were essential, and even those traits would not necessarily be enough to save the pilot from a fiery death. The end of the war saw a huge drop in aircraft production in the United States, with the annual figure dropping from 14,000 in 1918 to 263 in 1922. The French government continued to commission aircraft and used the surplus to subsidize a new field of commercial aviation. Civil flying resumed in 1919, and passenger services were established for short routes within Europe and America, usually made up of ex-military aeroplanes flown by ex-military pilots. Conditions were far from luxurious, and one carrier, Aircraft Transport and Travel, issued passengers with thick coats, helmets, goggles and gloves, and sometimes hot water bottles. Over the past century, the airline industry has grown from an experimental mode of transportation to a major part of the world's transportation system. Modern air transport has certainly come a long way from its humble beginnings. Passengers travel today in air-conditioned comfort, in spacious cabins, where they can rest and relax and arrive refreshed at their destination. The experience today can be further enhanced by the next-generation HD in-flight entertainment, wireless internet, and smartphone connectivity. Emerging technologies are ushering in more fuel-efficient, comfortable, and exotic aircraft. Get ready for the future of flight. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements. There have been many advancements in medical history, and some of the biggest medical breakthroughs have been the discovery of penicillin and the discovery of vaccinations. Entire careers, innumerable dead ends, and uncountable sums of money solving health problems are abridged with the benefit of hindsight into stories of single moments and heroic individual researchers. Many of the breakthroughs of major medical discoveries of the last decade are steps on a continuum of discovery and progress, important midpoints in research and treatment. To gain a proper understanding and appreciation for the evolution of modern medicine, knowledge of ancient civilization is essential. The ancient Egyptians, like the ancient Greeks and Romans, have provided modern historians with a great deal of knowledge and evidence about their attitude towards medicine and the medical knowledge that they had. This evidence has come from the numerous papyruses found in archaeological searches. Like prehistoric man, some of the beliefs of the Egyptians were based on myths and legend. However, beliefs also came from the increasing knowledge of the human anatomy and plain common sense. When there was no obvious reason for an illness, many ancient Egypt doctors and priests believed that disease was caused by spiritual beings. When no one could explain why someone had a disease, spells and magical potions were used to drive out the spirits. Despite this use of remedies that come from a lack of knowledge, the ancient Egyptians also developed their knowledge as a result of education. Ancient papyrus inform us that the ancient Egyptians were discovering things about how the human body worked, and they knew that the heart, pulse rates, blood, and air were important to the workings of the human body. A heart that beat feebly told doctors that the patient had problems. Many foundations of modern Western medicine lie in classical Greece. Greek medicine departed from the divine and mystical and moved towards observation and logical reasoning. These ideas spread throughout the Mediterranean world and as far east as India, and their influence has remained strong in the West to this day. Not all ancient Greeks turned to physicians when ill. Many still turned to the gods. The god Apollo was consulted at a temple in Delphi, and by the 6th century BC, many turned to the god Asclepius for help. Places called Asclepia were built for those in poor health. These were like temples, and here people came to bathe, sleep, and meditate. Patients were encouraged to sleep as it was believed that during sleep they would be visited by Asclepius and his 2 daughters. A visit by these 3 was expected to cure all ailments. The most famous of all ancient Greek doctors was Hippocrates, born in 460 BC. He became known as the founder of medicine and was regarded as the greatest physician of his time. He based his medical practice on observations and on the study of the human body. He held the belief that illness had a physical and a rational explanation, and he rejected the views of his time that considered illness to be caused by superstitions and by possession of evil spirits and disfavour of the gods. Hippocrates held the belief that the body must be treated as a whole and not just a series of parts. He accurately described disease symptoms and was the first physician to actually describe the symptoms of pneumonia as well as epilepsy in children. He believed in the natural healing process of rest, a good diet, fresh air and cleanliness. He noted that there were individual differences in the severity of disease symptoms and that some individuals were better able to cope with their disease and illness than others. He was also the first physician that held the belief that thoughts, ideas and feelings come from the brain and not the heart as others of his time believed. Hippocrates travelled throughout Greece practicing his medicine. He founded a medical school on the island of Kos where he was born and began teaching his ideas. He soon developed an oath of medical ethics for physicians to follow. The Hippocratic Oath is taken by physicians today as they begin their medical practice. Science and technology in ancient and medieval India covered all the major branches of human knowledge and activities, including medical science and surgery. Around 800 BC, the first compendium on medicine and surgery was compiled in ancient India. Hindu medicine is as ancient as Hindu civilization. Ancient India was a land of sages, saints and seers, as well as a land of scholars and scientists. Considered by many scholars to be the oldest healing science, Ayurveda is a holistic approach to health that is designed to help people live long, healthy and well-balanced lives. The term Ayurveda is taken from the Sanskrit words Ayas, meaning life or lifespan, and Veda, meaning knowledge. It has been practiced in India for at least 5,000 years and has only recently become popular in Western cultures. The contemporary form of Ayurvedic medicine is mostly derived from several sacred Indian texts, which were written in Sanskrit between 1500 BC and 400 AD. The basic principle of Ayurveda is to prevent illness by maintaining balance in the body, mind and consciousness through proper drinking, diet and lifestyle, as well as herbal remedies. Traditional Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years. Bear in mind that apart from the recorded documents, much of what is said about the origins of Chinese medicine is more legend than history. According to the legend, the origins of traditional Chinese medicine is traced back to the three legendary emperors or mythical rulers, Fu Zi, Shen Nong, and Hung Di. The first written documentation on traditional Chinese medicine is the Hung Di Ni Qing, the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. Hung Di Ni Qing is the oldest medical textbook in the world. Different opinions date the book back to between 800 BCE and 200 BCE. The textbook lays a primary foundation for the theories of Chinese medicine, which extensively summarizes and systematizes the previous experience of treatment and theories of medicine. The underlying principle of medieval medicine was the theory of humours. This was derived from the ancient medical works and dominated all Western medicine until the 19th century. The theory stated that within every individual there were 4 humours, or principal fluids: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm and blood. These were produced by various organs in the body, and they had to be in balance for a person to remain healthy. Too much phlegm in the body, for example, caused lung problems, and the body tried to cough up the phlegm to restore a balance. The balance of humours in humans could be achieved by diet, medicines, and by bloodletting using leeches. The use of herbs dovetailed naturally with this system, the success of herbal remedies being ascribed to their action upon the humours within the body. The use of herbs also drew upon the medieval Christian doctrine of signatures, which stated that God had provided some form of alleviation for every ill, and that these things, be they animal, vegetable, or mineral, carried a mark or a signature upon them that gave an indication of their usefulness. Frenchman René Laennec has been known in the scientific and medical world for his invention of the stethoscope in 1816. Born in Quimper, France, he studied medicine under the wing of his uncle Guillaume François Laennec at the University of Nantes. He later became the head of medicine at the Hôpital de la Charité and a professor of medicine at the Collège de France before dying of tuberculosis in 1826. During this point of history, the most common means for diagnosing heart conditions was to simply place one's ear over the patient's chest to listen for murmurs, vibrations, or deep rumblings that can indicate various heart and chest problems. Laennec recognized that factors such as the patient's weight and even gender affected the results of the traditional process of chest percussion and listening. Excess fat between the outer chest and heart region made hearing the sounds within the chest cavity extremely hard to hear without amplification. In addition, placing one's head against the chest of a female patient was very awkward for both the patient and the doctor. Laennec's solution was a wooden tube with a small earpiece that, when placed between the patient's chest and the doctor's ear, the sound from the chest cavity was amplified considerably. This simple device, inspired by a child's toy, was very effective, but met considerable resistance in the medical world due to how deeply engraved the traditional methods were in clinical practice. His design was improved in 1851 by Arthur Leard and George Kaman into the binaural stethoscope used in modern medical practices. Rudolf Virchow was one of the 19th century's foremost leaders in medicine and pathology. He was also a public health activist, social reformer, politician, and anthropologist. He had a strong interest in natural science. Virchow's greatest accomplishment was his observation that a whole organism does not get sick, only certain cells or groups of cells. In 1855, at the age of 34, he published his now famous aphorism, Omnis cellula e cellula. Every cell stems from another cell. With this approach, Virchow launched the field of cellular pathology. He stated that all diseases involve changes in normal cells. That is, all pathology ultimately is cellular pathology. This insight led to major progress in the practice of medicine. It meant that disease entities could be defined much more sharply. Diseases could be characterized not merely by a group of clinical symptoms, but by typical anatomic changes. Pathologic anatomy, in addition to its great scientific merit, had tremendous practical consequences. If the physician was able to find out what anatomic changes had occurred in a patient, he could make a much more accurate diagnosis of the disease than he could in the past. This also empowered physicians to give more precise treatment and prognosis. In many of his speeches, Virchow stated that the practice of medicine in Germany should shift away from being a largely theoretical activity. He advocated for the study of microscopic pathological anatomy, for research to be performed by physicians, the importance of making systematic clinical observations, and the performance of animal experimentations. Virchow's many discoveries include finding cells in bone and connective tissue and describing substances such as myelin. While Virchow in Germany was developing the new science of cellular pathology, Louis Pasteur in France was developing the new science of bacteriology. Virchow fought the germ theory of Pasteur. He believed that a diseased tissue was caused by a breakdown of order within cells, and not from an invasion of a foreign organism. We know today that Virchow and Pasteur were both correct in their theories on the causality of disease. If one were to choose among the greatest benefactors of humanity, Louis Pasteur would certainly rank at the top. He solved the mysteries of rabies, anthrax, chicken cholera, and silkworm diseases, and contributed to the development of the first vaccines. He debunked the widely accepted myth of spontaneous generation, thereby setting the stage for modern biology and biochemistry. He described the scientific basis for fermentation, winemaking, and the brewing of beer. Pasteur's work gave birth to many branches of science, and he was single-handedly responsible for some of the most important theoretical concepts and practical applications of modern science. Pasteur's achievements seem widely diverse at first glance, but a more in-depth look at the evolution of his career indicates that there is a logical order to his discoveries. He is revered for possessing the most important qualities of a scientist: the ability to survey all the known data and link the data for all possible hypotheses, the patience and drive to conduct experiments under strictly controlled conditions, and the brilliance to uncover the road to the solution from the results. In 1928, bacteriologist Alexander Fleming made a chance discovery from an already discarded contaminated Petri dish. The mold that had contaminated the experiment turned out to contain a powerful antibiotic, penicillin. However, though Fleming was credited with the discovery, it was over a decade before someone else turned penicillin into the miracle drug for the 20th century. 12 years later, in 1940, the second year of World War II, two scientists at Oxford University were researching promising projects in bacteriology that could possibly be enhanced or continued with chemistry. Australian Howard Florey and German refugee Ernst Chain began working with penicillin. Using new chemical techniques, they were able to produce a brown powder that kept its antibacterial power for longer than a few days. They experimented with the powder and found it to be safe. Needing the new drug immediately for the war front, mass production started quickly. The availability of penicillin during World War II saved many lives that otherwise would have been lost due to bacterial infections in even minor wounds. Penicillin also treated diphtheria, gangrene, pneumonia, syphilis and tuberculosis. Though Fleming discovered penicillin, it took Florey and Chain to make it a usable product. Though both Fleming and Florey were knighted in 1944, and all three of them, Fleming, Florey and Chain, were awarded the 1945 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, Fleming is still credited for discovering penicillin. In America in the 1950s, summertime was a time of fear and anxiety for many parents. This was a season when children by the thousands became infected with the crippling disease poliomyelitis or polio. This burden of fear was lifted forever when it was announced that Dr. Jonas Salk had developed a vaccine against the disease. Salk became world famous overnight, but his discovery was the result of many years of painstaking research. After completing medical school and his internship, Salk returned to the study of influenza, the flu virus. World War II had begun, and public health experts feared a replay of the flu epidemic that had killed millions in the wake of the First World War. The development of vaccines controlled the spread of flu after the war, and the epidemic of 1919 did not reoccur. In 1947, Salk accepted an appointment to the University of Pittsburgh Medical School. While working there with the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis, Salk saw an opportunity to develop a vaccine against polio and devoted himself to this work for the next 8 years. In 1955, Salk's years of research paid off. Human trials of the polio vaccine effectively protected the subject from the polio virus. When news of the discovery was made public on April 12, 1955, Salk was hailed as a miracle worker. He further endeared himself to the public by refusing to patent the vaccine. He had no desire to profit personally from the discovery, but merely wished to see the vaccine disseminated as widely as possible. Salk's vaccine was composed of killed polio virus, which retained the ability to immunize without running the risk of infecting the patient. A few years later, a vaccine made from live poliovirus was developed, which could be administered orally, while Salk's vaccine required injection. Further, there was some evidence that the killed vaccine failed to completely immunize the patient. In the US, public health authorities elected to distribute the live oral vaccine instead of Salk's. Tragically, the preparation of live virus infected some patients with the disease, rather than immunizing them. Since the introduction of the original vaccine, the few new cases of polio reported in the United States were probably caused by the live vaccine, which was intended to prevent them. In countries where Salk's vaccine has remained in use, the disease has been virtually eradicated. As we look back, it is easy to see that modern medical science has indeed made incredible advances and contributions which have alleviated much pain and suffering, and will likely continue to do so in the future with advancements in stem cell research, surgical technique, prosthetics, subcellular intervention, metabolomics, and more. Despite a great deal of resistance to stem cell research outside of the medical community, advances have continued, and in most cases without the need for embryonic stem cells. Tests on mice for treatment of diabetes have shown that stem cell therapy can indeed stimulate the regeneration of lost beta cells to produce insulin. Although more wishful thinking than practical at the moment, stem cell therapy is likely to begin asserting itself as a major medical treatment for a multitude of diseases in the next 10 to 20 years. The advancement in prosthetics is almost mind-boggling, again something beyond the capability of alternative medicine. Gene therapy is coming, although it might be 10 to 20 years down the road before we see any significant number of practical applications, but they're coming. But gene therapy is just the tip of the iceberg. Metabolomics is the study of all of the byproducts produced by your body's myriad metabolic processes. These metabolites are easily found in the urine and blood and provide a wealth of information as to the state of your health. And more importantly, where your health is headed. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements. Communication is a tool with which we exercise our influence on others, bring out changes in attitudes, motivate the people around us, and establish and maintain relationships with them. Nowadays, perhaps faster than ever before, due to amazing advances in technology, technical breakthroughs alter the way we perceive the universe and manner in which we communicate with one another. History of print media and written communication follows the progress of civilization, which in turn moves in response to changing cultural technologies. The transfer of complex information, ideas and concepts from one individual to another or to a group underwent extreme evolution since prehistoric times, and it is still dramatically changing. The invention of the printing press in the late 15th century gave rise to some of the first forms of mass communication by enabling the publication of books and newspapers on a scale much larger than was previously possible. The invention also transformed the way the world received printed materials. Newspapers developed from about 1612, with the first example in English in 1620. But they took until the 19th century to reach a mass audience directly. The first high-circulation newspapers arose in London in the early 1800s and were made possible by the invention of high-speed rotary steam printing presses and railroads which allowed large-scale distribution over wide geographical areas. The increase in circulation, however, led to a decline in feedback and interactivity from the readership, making newspapers a more one-way medium. The phrase "the media" began to be used in the 1920s. The notion of mass media was generally restricted to print media up until the post-Second World War, when radio, television and video were introduced. The audio-visual facilities became very popular because they provided both information and entertainment, because the colour and sound engaged the viewers and listeners, and because it was easier for the general public to passively watch TV or listen to the radio than to actively read. Non-verbal communication is any kind of communication not involving words. When the term is used, most people think of facial expressions and gestures, but while these are important elements of non-verbal communication, they are not the only ones. Sign language is used all over the world by the hearing impaired to communicate with each other and with those that hear. Sign language is more than just moving the fingers or hands. It is a viable, visible language. A sign language is a language which, instead of acoustically conveyed sound patterns, uses manual communication and body language to convey meaning. This can involve simultaneously combining hand shapes, orientation, movement of hands, arms or body, and facial expressions to fluidly express a speaker's thoughts. Where communities of deaf people exist, sign languages develop. While they utilise space for grammar in a way that spoken languages do not, sign languages exhibit the same linguistic properties and use the same language faculty as do spoken language. Alexander Graham Bell was an eminent scientist, inventor, engineer and innovator who is credited with inventing the first practical telephone. Bell's father, grandfather and brother had all been associated with work elocution and speech, and both his mother and wife were deaf, profoundly influencing Bell's life work. His research on hearing and speech further led him to experiment with hearing devices, which eventually culminated in Bell being awarded the first US patent for the telephone in 1876. In retrospect, Bell considered his most famous invention an intrusion on his real work as a scientist and refused to have a telephone in his study. Many other inventions marked Bell's later life, including groundbreaking work in optical telecommunications, hydrofoils and aeronautics. In 1888, Bell became one of the founding members of the National Geographic Society. He has been described as one of the most influential figures in human history. The world's communication has been upgraded greatly by Alexander Graham Bell. Before the invention of telephones, mail was a large part of cultural society. This was mainly because it was the only way of communication. The invention of the telephone had a large impact. It made business more efficient, and it saved money from having to travel back and forth from distant places, and it made transactions able to occur more quickly. It led to instant communications around the world, and even led to the internet. It lets you communicate to other people. If you didn't have the telephone, then how would you contact people? You wouldn't. Telephones are a huge part of today's culture. As telephones became more and more advanced, they also became more and more popular. Nowadays, it is the most common way of communication. Our modern-day telephone system has made our communication system more unified and almost in real time. Telephone has bridged the gap of long-distance communication. Radar is often called the weapon that won World War II and the invention that changed the world. While these claims may be a little hyperbolic, there is no question that radar was a major development. It has certainly proven to be one of the most amazingly useful developments of the 20th century and is vital to aviation. It is also a clear example of a military technology that had important civilian uses. The military has always pushed the boundaries of radar technology, while civilian needs for air traffic control were far less demanding. However, by the 21st century, other technologies were beginning to supplement and in some ways replace radar. In particular, the Global Positioning System and satellite communication links allow ground controllers to track aircraft without using radar at all. The television has become such an integral part of homes in the modern world that it is hard to imagine life without it. The television provides entertainment to people of all ages. Not just for entertainment value, television is also a valuable resource for advertising and communication with a mass audience. In the late 1800s, Paul Nipkow, a student in Germany, developed the first ever mechanical module of television. He succeeded in sending images through wires with the help of a rotating metal disc. This technology was called the electric telescope, that had 18 lines of resolution. From the experiments, two types of television systems came into existence: mechanical television and electronic television. All the early television systems were black and white, colour television being invented much later on. Since the early invention of television in the beginning of the 1900s, history has seen many firsts in the area of television. The history of the Internet began with the development of computers in the 1950s. This began with point-to-point communication between mainframe computers and terminals, expanded to point-to-point connections between computers, and then early research into packet switching. In 1982, Internet Protocol Suite was standardized, and the concept of a worldwide network of fully interconnected networks called the Internet was introduced. The Internet was commercialized in 1995 when NSFNet was decommissioned, removing the last restrictions on the use of the Internet to carry commercial traffic. Since the mid-1990s, the Internet has had a drastic impact on culture and commerce, including the rise of near-instant communication by electronic mail, instant messaging, voice-over Internet protocol, two-way interactive video calls, and the World Wide Web.
This is the Next Cube, a sort of high-end workstation from 1990. It's a fantastic looking machine. It's if the Borg had a computer, I guess it'd look like this. It's a pretty rare beast. We're very lucky to have one of these, and in especially such good condition. It's a fairly significant machine, and on one of these machines, Tim Berners-Lee developed the World Wide Web, which is something we're all sort of very familiar with now.
Tim Berners-Lee followed his dream of a better, easier way to communicate via computers on a global scale, which led him to create the World Wide Web. CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, is where it all began, in March 1989. A physicist, Tim Berners-Lee, wrote a self-proposal for information management, showing how information could be transferred easily over the Internet by using hypertext, the now familiar point-and-click system of navigating through information.
It's changed through time. For the first few years, it was just a question of persuading people that it would be a good idea. Nobody could imagine what the web would be like, and it wasn't very exciting to put stuff on the web because there wasn't very much to link to.
The idea was to connect hypertext with the Internet and personal computers, thereby having a single information network to help CERN physicists share all the computer-stored information at the laboratory. Hypertext would enable users to browse easily between texts on web pages using links.
The expansion of broadband across Europe and in the US, that's been a real catalyst for the growth of websites. Similarly, a number of services have grown out of the dot-com era that allow for cheap and free website creation for little, and in many cases, no money. So any person can very quickly get online and create a website in a matter of seconds.
In 2004, Berners-Lee was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his pioneering work. With the convenience and influence of mobile devices, computers and the internet, it is impossible to ignore the fact that we have a major shift in the way we interact and communicate in society. Social networking has been born from this shift of the times and has since been the craze amongst younger generations. The prolific nature of social networking is the result of the necessity to engage with friends, families and communities. This carries an addictive quality that makes it fun and interesting to learn and use. Therefore, it is welcomed and incorporated into our busy lives. In the last decade around the world, we have witnessed an explosion in online interaction and have witnessed the evolution of media. It's very plausible that at least someone you know at this very second is tweeting about their day or updating their status on Facebook. The internet has allowed us the opportunity to stay connected to each other at all times of the day.
Just helping people share information. We believe really deeply that if people are sharing more, then the world will be a more open place where people can understand what's going on with the people around them. And that's really what we want to get towards.
This reaches a group of people that don't typically get their news anywhere else other than the internet. Social networking just gets to a demographic of people who are on the move or stay connected through non-traditional media.
Social networking services expand the pool of people we have the opportunity to meet to near limitless possibilities. We're no longer restricted to or rely on people in our local communities, neighbourhood or workplaces to provide the interaction we desire. The power in social media is that it has the ability to unite large masses of people and communicate with them in seconds. How users manipulate their power to communicate with the masses is what defines the experience. Social media provides us the ability to create an atmosphere, to create information, and share it at lightning speeds. It's what we do with this new tool that could define new additions and pave the way for the future of human interaction. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's greatest achievements. Many consider man's single greatest achievement to be the discovery of time. Without this discovery, our ability to navigate spaceships in and out of Earth's orbit would be non-existent. It is our discovery of time and our understanding of orbital variations that has and will continue to mark the upward surge of mankind. With the Soviet Sputnik success in October 1957, Wernher von Braun and his team successfully launched America's first spacecraft, the satellite Explorer 1. With the birth of NASA, the US space program had the dedicated resources it needed for the next great achievement, getting a human being into space. On the morning of July 16, 1969, almost the whole world was watching the Kennedy Space Center, where Apollo 11 was due to lift off. This had been John Kennedy's dream. Now was the moment of reckoning.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
As the incredible might of Saturn V lifted Apollo 11 clear of the tower and pierced the deep blue sky, it was a moment of pure awe. Right now, the hopes of millions of people rested on just 3 men: Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin Jr. It would take them 4 days, travelling 250,000 miles to reach their destination. Despite the long wait, on Earth public anticipation remained high. Previous Apollo missions had been televised, and this was no exception. What was exceptional, though, was the level of interest. In what was probably the biggest news event in many years, countless people tuned in, travelling every step of the way with the astronauts.
Feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20. Down a half. 30 seconds forward. Just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. I'm at the foot of the ladder. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Aldrin, a spiritual man, joined Armstrong on the ground, describing the view as magnificent desolation. Now there was work to be done, but the moon's gravity was 1/6 that of Earth's, and the fine moon dust slippery, making it difficult to move around. The 2 men experimented with kangaroo hops, but their life support backups threw them off balance. Eventually they settled for a loping gait, but had to plan all their movements ahead. Gradually they got their task done with a 15-minute extension granted by Mission Control. They planted the American flag, collected soil and rock samples, took photographs, and set up measuring equipment. They also took a call from President Nixon, congratulating them on their achievement. With time up, they packed the 22 kilograms of lunar samples into the lunar module, jettisoned any unnecessary weight, and after a much-needed sleep, began their ascent from the moon. As the lunar module lifted off, the American flag Armstrong and Aldrin had so carefully planted in the ground was too close to the rocket exhausts. The flag was blown away and a lesson learned. Future landings made sure the flag was well out of harm's way. The Eagle's ascent from the moon had been the one area that could not be tested, but it proved to be easy, and they returned to orbit smoothly. After meeting with Michael Collins, the delicate manoeuvring of the rendezvous and docking took place. The Eagle's cargo was transferred to the command module, and the Eagle jettisoned. Now it was home time. Just before the sun climbed over Earth's horizon, the 3 astronauts splashed down 24 kilometres from the recovery ship. Drivers from Navy helicopters were on hand and anchored the command module so it couldn't drift off, and the astronauts were given quarantine suits. A welcoming committee awaited their arrival on Hornet, including President Nixon. Although it was not considered likely, the possibility of disease or pathogens being brought back from the moon was not something to take a chance with. The astronauts remained in their isolation suits and then entered the ship's mobile quarantine facility. At least now they were on their own soil and on their way home. In 1865, with astonishing foresight and accuracy, Jules Verne wrote From the Earth to the Moon. It inspired great minds who envisaged multi-stage liquid fuel rockets and developed the rocket equation. During the 1930s, Nazi Germany pursued rocketry for warfare. They built the world's first ballistic missiles after a few setbacks. Werner von Braun produced Vengeance Weapon 2, the V-2 rocket that bombed Belgium, France and London, and was the forerunner of modern rocket propulsion. Post-war, he was employed in America, developing ballistic missiles. Later, working for NASA, it was his Saturn V rocket that launched Apollo 11 into space.
July 1st marks the beginning of one of the great scientific adventures of our time.
This was the beginning of the 18-month-long International Geophysical Year. Harnessing the new technologies of rocketry and computers, 67 countries studied weather, the oceans and poles, seismology, solar activity, and the atmosphere. Both Russia and America launched satellites into space. On October 4, 1957, Russia's Sputnik 1 became the first man-made satellite in orbit. Every 96 minutes it orbited the Earth, collecting valuable atmospheric and radio signal information. It re-entered Earth's atmosphere and burned up after 3 months in orbit, having travelled 60 million kilometres. 1 month later, a second Sputnik was launched, the first spacecraft to carry a living creature. Despite a fault with the temperature control, causing the dog's death, Sputnik 2 was a great success for Russia. In America, it was a different story. Its Vanguard launch had failed, damaging the satellite and the launch pad, and it was the following year before its Explorer satellite was successfully launched. Russia's Sputnik success embarrassed America and sparked the government's decision to set up NASA. Following successful missions by Russia using dogs and America using chimps, the Russians took the next step. On April 12, 1961, 27-year-old Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space. Standing just 5'2", this was probably the first time in his life he was glad to be short, clinching his selection to man the cramped space capsule. He completed a full orbit of Earth in 108 minutes and landed safely, deservedly a national hero. US President J.F. Kennedy felt great pressure to have the United States catch up to and overtake the Soviet Union in the space race. 4 years after the Sputnik shock of 1957, and with Gagarin becoming the first human in space, the US was greatly embarrassed. In addition, the Bay of Pigs fiasco in mid-April put unquantifiable pressure on Kennedy. He wanted to announce a program that the US had a strong chance at achieving before the Soviet Union. After consulting with Vice President Johnson, NASA Administrator James Webb, and other officials, he concluded that landing an American on the moon would be a very challenging technological feat, but an area of space exploration in which the US actually had a potential lead. Thus, the Cold War is the primary contextual lens through which many historians now view Kennedy's speech. The decision involved much consideration before making it public, as well as enormous human efforts and expenditures to make what became Project Apollo a reality by 1969. Only the construction of the Panama Canal in modern peacetime and the Manhattan Project in war were comparable in scope. On May 25, 1961, US President John F. Kennedy announced before a special joint session of Congress the dramatic and ambitious goal of sending an American safely to the moon before the end of the decade.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
America accelerated its efforts, preparing astronauts for the Project Mercury spaceflights. Just over 3 weeks after Gagarin orbited Earth, America launched its first manned spacecraft, piloted by Alan Shepard. It was a short 16-minute non-orbit flight, but an important milestone.
I think probably there hasn't been maybe enough emphasis on the real goals of our program, or the first, what we're trying to do on Mercury. Actually, we're trying to put a man in space so that we can determine what his capabilities are, what he can or cannot do in space, so that we'll know how to design future vehicles better for the man. Because some of these days we're going to have power plants that will enable man to go out in space and make decisions on where he wants to go and what he wants to do, much as we do in airplanes now. When we reach that stage, then man becomes not excess baggage, but he becomes a real vital, living, necessary part of this thing.
Colonel John Glenn was selected to make the first American manned flight, but the launch had been postponed several times. Finally, 10 months after Gagarin, it was his turn.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. We have a liftoff at 15 minutes after the hour.
In a flight lasting almost 5 hours, Glenn orbited Earth 3 times. Unlike the Gagarin flight, which was remotely controlled by ground staff, John Glenn had to take over manually, overriding malfunctioning automatic altitude and fuel controls. The descent to Earth was nerve-wracking. A sensor indicated the spaceship's heat shield was breaking loose, meaning the craft would incinerate during re-entry. An anxious crowd, including President Kennedy, awaited the moment of truth. The sensor proved to be faulty, and he splashed down safely in the Atlantic, slightly short of the planned landing zone, but to the relief of an entire nation alive. Russia and America both launched satellites as early as the 1950s, and in the following years, increasingly sophisticated measuring equipment gathered atmospheric data, enabling advanced weather forecasting. A global spread of satellites has revolutionized our way of life, with high-speed communications part of everyday living. NASA research was not confined to outer space. Extensive study and testing helped determine the effects of wind turbulence on aircraft, whether caused by other planes or natural forces. Also closer to home, high-altitude photographic surveys were undertaken towards developing remote sensing of natural disasters. The developments that grew out of the space program increasingly affected everyday technologies embraced by people worldwide. As time went by, the intense rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States gradually eased, eventually leading to a more practical, cooperative approach to space exploration. But this was a long time coming, following several years when both battled the same problems, sought the same solutions, and conducted the same experiments. The difficulty was keeping man alive for several days, with limited air, water, and energy. This would prove to be crucial for the crew in the ill-fated Apollo 13. The concept of the space shuttle actually was formed in the 1950s, but design and construction of this very practical spacecraft was not begun until the 70s, and the first test flights begun in 1981. With over 2.5 million parts, it's considered mankind's most complex machinery. It had an enormously successful career as a spacecraft launched by rocket for orbital space missions, successfully launching satellites and space probes, carrying equipment and gathering research. The shuttle's special feature is that it is largely reusable, landing like a conventional aeroplane on a long runway. It's also had its tragedies, the loss of Challenger, which exploded just after launch, and Columbia, which disintegrated on re-entry. Both disasters were largely avoidable. Forerunner of the space station, Skylab was a dedicated scientific and research space lab. Designed to be manned for lengthy periods, extensive crew training and testing was carried out to ascertain humans' ability to cope in the confined spaces, and great emphasis was placed on creating a habitable environment. The idea of an orbiting laboratory was first conceived in the 1950s, and finally came to fruition in 1973, when an unmanned Skylab was launched.
This year has been a big year for Skylab. All of the hardware for the program is coming into focus. Our qualification programs are underway. The major elements of the Skylab system are in the final positions of manufacturing and checkout. Now, one of the more important things to me about Skylab is it gives us an opportunity to learn more about man's capability to work and live in space.
The much-anticipated launch took place on May 14th, but did not go to plan. The meteoroid shield, which doubled as shade for the workshop, was ripped off by the atmospheric drag a little over a minute after takeoff. This also disturbed sections of the solar array, and the planned launch of the first crew had to be delayed until repairs were made, including a new insulation cloth to prevent overheating. Skylab's 3 crews stayed a total of 171 days, completing almost 300 scientific, technical, and medical experiments. Skylab paved the way for future stations, like the International Space Station. Man's desire to explore the galaxies and seek out other planets is hardly surprising. From the beginning, human beings have been inquisitive creatures. We've always had the urge to explore territories and see what's around the corner. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. we now possess a treasure house of man's greatest achievements. Electricity powers our transport, heating, lighting, communications, computation, and a host of essential services that we take for granted. However, electricity has much more important aspects because it is a fundamental feature of all matter. Electrical phenomena has been studied since antiquity, though advances in the science were not made until the 17th and 18th centuries. Practical applications for electricity, however, remained few, and it would not be until the late 19th century that engineers were able to put it to industrial and residential use. The history of electricity begins with William Gilbert. Before William Gilbert, all that was known about electricity and magnetism was that the lodestone possessed magnetic properties, and that rubbing amber and jet would attract bits of stuff to start sticking. In 1600, William Gilbert published his treatise De Magnet. Printed in scholarly Latin, the book explained years of Gilbert's research and experiments on electricity and magnetism. Gilbert raised the interest in the new science greatly. It was Gilbert who coined the expression electrica in his famous book. In 1733, Charles Francois Dufay discovered that electricity comes in two forms, which he called negative and positive. The Leyden jar was the original capacitor, a device that stores and releases an electrical charge. At that time, electricity was considered the mysterious fluid or force. In 1745, the Leyden jar was invented in Holland and Germany almost simultaneously. Both Dutch physicist Peter van Musschenbroek and German clergyman and scientist Ewald Christian von Kleist invented a Leyden jar. When von Kleist first touched his Leyden jar, he received a powerful shock that knocked him to the floor. The Leyden jar was named after Musschenbroek's hometown and University Leyden by Abbe Nollet, a French scientist who first coined the term Leyden jar. The jar was once called the Kleisten jar after von Kleist, but his name did not stick. Benjamin Franklin was born on January 17, 1706. He was the 15th child out of a total of 17 brothers and sisters. Franklin worked numerous jobs during his lifetime, including as a printer for the Philadelphia Gazette. Franklin's most famous discovery was that electricity and lightning were one and the same. Ben Franklin's lightning rod was the first practical application of electricity. Henry Cavendish of England, Coulomb of France, and Luigi Galvani of Italy made scientific contributions towards finding practical uses for electricity. In 1747, Cavendish started measuring the conductivity, the ability to carry an electrical current, of different materials and published his results. In 1786, Luigi Galvani, an Italian physician, demonstrated what we now understand to be the electrical basis of nerve impulses. Galvani made frog muscles twitch by jolting them with a spark from an electrostatic machine. Following the work of Cavendish and Galvani came a group of important scientists and inventors, including Alessandro Volta of Italy, Hans Ørsted of Denmark, André Ampère of France, George Ohm of Germany, Michael Faraday of England, and Joseph Henry of America. Joseph Henry was a researcher in the field of electricity whose work inspired inventors. Hans Christian Ørsted was a Danish physicist and chemist who discovered that electric currents create magnetic fields, an important aspect of electromagnetism. During a lecture, Ørsted noticed a compass needle deflected from magnetic north when an electric current from a battery was switched on and off, confirming a direct relationship between electricity and magnetism. Ørsted's findings stirred much research into electrodynamics throughout the scientific community, and his work also represented a major step toward a unified concept of energy. André Ampère, a French physicist and mathematician, is generally regarded as one of the main discoverers of electromagnetism. As a high school teacher, George Ohm began his research with the new electrochemical cell, invented by Italian scientist Alessandro Volta. Using equipment of his own creation, Ohm found that there is a direct proportionality between the potential difference applied across a conductor and the resultant electric current. This relationship is known as Ohm's law. Michael Faraday was a British scientist, chemist, physicist, and philosopher who greatly contributed to the fields of electromagnetism and electrochemistry. His main discoveries included the magnetic field, electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and electrolysis. Although Faraday received little formal education and knew little of higher mathematics, he was one of the most influential scientists in history. Historians of science refer to him as having been the best experimentalist in the history of science. It was Faraday's research on the magnetic field around a conductor carrying a DC electric current that he established the basis for the concept of the electromagnetic fields in physics. Faraday also established that magnetism could affect rays of light and that there was an underlying relationship between the two phenomena. One of Faraday's 1831 experiments, demonstrating induction, shows the liquid battery sending an electric current through the small coil. When it is moved in or out of the large coil, its magnetic field induces a momentary voltage in the coil, which is detected by the galvanometer. His inventions of the electromagnetic rotary devices formed the foundation of electric motor technology, and it was largely due to his efforts that electricity became viable for use in technology. In 1839, he completed a series of experiments aimed at investigating the fundamental nature of electricity. Faraday used static batteries and animal electricity to produce the phenomena of electrostatic attraction, electrolysis and magnetism, among others. He concluded that, contrary to the scientific opinion of the time, the divisions between the various kinds of electricity were illusory. Faraday instead proposed that only a single electricity exists, and the changing values of current and voltage would produce different groups of phenomena. In 1824, Joseph Henry was employed as an assistant engineer on a survey team for a state road between the Hudson River and Lake Erie. The experience changed the course of his career. He decided to study civil and mechanical engineering instead of medicine, thus beginning his work with magnets. Joseph Henry's first discovery was that the power of a magnet could be immensely strengthened by winding it with insulated wire. He was the first person to make a magnet that could lift 3,500 pounds of weight. Henry showed the difference between quantity magnets composed of short lengths of wire connected in parallel and excited by a few large cells, and intensity magnets wound with a single long wire and excited by a battery composed of cells in a series. This was an original discovery, greatly increasing both the immediate usefulness of the magnet and its possibilities for future experiments. Using his newly developed electromagnetic principle, Henry created one of the first machines to use electromagnetism for motion. This was the earliest ancestor of the modern DC motor and allowed Henry to recognize the property of self-inductance. Henry died on the 13th of May 1878 and was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in the Georgetown section of northwest Washington, D.C. William Sturgeon was an English physicist and inventor who made the first electromagnets and invented the first practical English electric motor. It was his invention of the electromagnet that encouraged researchers to experiment with it, resulting in attempts to send signals by electricity. However, it was Joseph Henry who discovered the essential mechanics behind the electric telegraph. Arc light is the general term for a class of lamps that produce light by an electric arc. The arc light as a practical illuminating device was invented in 1878 by Charles Brush. Other inventors improved the arc light, but there were drawbacks. For outdoor lighting and large halls, arc lights worked well, but arc lights could not be used in small rooms. The problem of indoor lighting was to be solved by one of America's most famous inventors. Thomas Edison is the fourth most prolific inventor in history, holding 1,093 US patents in his name, as well as many patents in the United Kingdom, France and Germany. He is credited with numerous inventions that contributed to mass communication, and in particular telecommunications. These included a stock ticker, a mechanical vote recorder, a battery for an electric car, electrical power, recorded music and motion pictures. His advanced work in these fields was an outgrowth of his early career as a telegraph operator. Edison originated the concept and implementation of electric power generation and distribution to homes, businesses and factories, a crucial development in the modern industrialized world. His first power station was on Manhattan Island, New York. Building on the contributions of other developers over the previous 3/4 of a century, Edison made improvements to the idea of incandescent light and entered the public consciousness as the inventor of the light bulb and a prime mover in developing the necessary infrastructure for electric power. After many experiments with platinum and other metal filaments, Edison returned to carbon filament. The first successful test was on October 22, 1879. It lasted 13.5 hours. Edison continued to improve his design and by November 4, 1879, filed for a US patent for an electric lamp. Although the patent describes several ways of creating the carbon filament, including cotton and linen thread, wood splints, papers coiled in various ways, it was not until several months after the patent was granted that Edison and his team discovered a carbonized bamboo filament that could last over 1,200 hours. Edison's true success, like that of his friend Henry Ford, was in his ability to maximize profits through establishment of mass production systems and intellectual property rights. In 1887, there were 121 Edison power stations in the United States, delivering DC electricity to customers. When the limitations of DC were discussed by the public, Edison launched a propaganda campaign to convince people that AC was far too dangerous to use. The war against AC led him to become involved in the development and promotion of the electric chair, using AC as an attempt to portray AC to have greater lethal potential than DC. Edison went on to carry out a brief but intense campaign to ban the use of AC or to limit the allowable voltage for safety purposes. Edison patented a system for electricity distribution in 1880, which was essential to capitalize on the invention of the electric lamp. On December 17, 1880, Edison founded the Edison Illuminating Company. The company established the first investor-owned electric utility in 1882 on Pearl Street Station, New York City. It was on September 4, 1882, that Edison switched on his Pearl Street generating station's electrical power distribution system, which provided 110 volts direct current to 59 customers in Lower Manhattan. Earlier in the year, in January 1882, he had switched on the first steam generating power station at Holborn Viaduct in London. The DC supply system provided electricity supplies to street lamps and several private dwellings within a short distance of the station. The key to Edison's fortunes was telegraphy. With knowledge gained from years of working as a telegraph operator, he learned the basics of electricity. This allowed him to make his early fortune with the stock ticker, the first electricity-based broadcast system. Edison patented the sound recording and the reproducing phonograph in 1878.
How does it feel to be 84 years old?
Well, it feels very fine to be 84 years of age if you don't have anything the matter with you. Well, I have a little trouble now and then, but that's because I'm getting old. But I've got a lot of ginger yet.
What do you think of the Einstein theory, Mr. Edison?
I don't think anything of Einstein's theory because I can't understand it.
Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in Croatia. The son of a Serbian Orthodox clergyman, Tesla studied engineering at the Austrian Polytechnic School. He worked as an electrical engineer in Budapest and later emigrated to the United States in 1884 to work at the Edison Machine Works. During his lifetime, Tesla invented fluorescent lighting, the Tesla induction motor, the Tesla coil, and developed the alternating current electrical supply system that included a motor and transformer and three-phase electricity. Tesla's patents and theoretical work also formed the basis of wireless communication and the radio. A Tesla coil is an electrical resonant transformer circuit that is used to produce high voltage, low current, high frequency alternating current electricity. Tesla used these coils to conduct innovative experiments in electrical lighting, phosphorescence, X-ray generation, high frequency alternating current phenomena, electrotherapy, and the transmission of electrical energy without wires. In 1885, George Westinghouse, head of the Westinghouse Electric Company, bought the patents rights to Tesla's system of dynamos, transformers, and motors. Westinghouse used Tesla's alternating current system to light the World's Columbium Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. In the late 1880s, Tesla and American inventor Thomas Edison became adversaries, in part because of Edison's promotion of direct current for electric power distribution over the more efficient alternating current advocated by Tesla and Westinghouse. The problem with DC was that the power plants could economically deliver DC electricity only to customers within about 1.5 miles from the generating station, so that it was suitable only for central business districts. When George Westinghouse suggested using high voltage AC instead, as it could carry electricity hundreds of miles with marginal loss of power, Edison waged a war of currents to prevent AC from being adopted. As a result of the war of currents, Edison and Westinghouse went nearly bankrupt. In 1897, Tesla released Westinghouse from contract, providing Westinghouse a break from Tesla's patent royalties. In 1897, at age 41, Tesla filed the first radio patent. A year later, he demonstrated a radio-controlled boat to the US military, believing that the military would want things such as radio-controlled torpedoes. Remote radio control remained a novelty until World War I, and afterward, when a number of countries used it in military programs. In 1898, Tesla designed the Wardenclyffe Tower, an early wireless telecommunications tower intended for commercial transatlantic wireless telephony, broadcasting, and to demonstrate the transmission of power without interconnecting wires. In his Colorado Springs lab, Tesla researched ways to transmit power and energy wirelessly over long distances and discovered that the resonant frequency of the Earth was approximately 8 Hertz. At his peak, he was intimate with poets and scientists, industrialists and financiers, yet Tesla died destitute, having lost both his fortune and scientific reputation. During his fall from notoriety to obscurity, Tesla created a legacy of genuine invention and prophecy that still fascinates today. The use of electricity gives a very convenient way to transfer energy, and because of this, it has been adapted to a huge and growing number of uses. Electric cars were popular in the late 19th century and early 20th century, until advances in internal combustion engine technology and mass production of cheaper gasoline vehicles led to a decline in the use of the electric drive vehicle. The global economic recession in the late 2000s led to increased calls for automakers to abandon fuel and inefficient SUVs in favor of small cars, hybrid cars and electric cars. California electric car maker Tesla Motors began development in 2004 on the Tesla Roadster, which was first delivered to customers in 2008. The Roadster was the first highway-capable all-electric vehicle in serial production, available in the United States. Electrical vehicle company Vectrix developed the first commercially available high-performance maxi-sized electric scooter as another alternative to petrol-powered vehicles. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements. There have been many tremendous advances in technology over the last decade. So many, in fact, the pace is accelerating. Every day, new things are discovered with our ever-increasing scientific knowledge. Technology has also brought us closer together. Communicating with each other is instantaneous. We have all become accustomed to the advantages that science has brought us. Today's modern world would simply be unimaginable without continuing progress. Architecture is being influenced by modern technology, and many new methods, techniques and processes have been introduced in the respective field over the last few decades. Architecture has a great importance, as constructing minor to huge structures is impossible without proper application of architectural concepts. The kind of architecture and designs that are practiced today are quite different from those practiced a few centuries ago. With the increasing complexity of buildings, new engineering techniques and technology are employed. Architecture has become more multidisciplinary. It needs a team of professionals to execute the designs properly. In the last 2 decades, architecture has seen an increase in specialised techniques, project delivery and technological expertise. Architecture is basically a combination of science and art in the construction of buildings and the design of different physical structures for human use. A wider definition of architecture includes the design of a constructed environment as a whole. From the macro level of how a building matches with its environmental context, like urban design, town planning, and landscape architecture, to the micro level of physical construction of architectural details and sometimes hardware and furniture. Advancements in building materials together with design have a major impact on a building's earthquake safety. Earthquakes occur in many parts of the world, sometimes with great regularity. The magnitude of an earthquake is measured by the Richter seismic scale, while the severity of an earthquake is measured in terms of damage and lives lost. The damage and casualties are related to more the strength of the tremor, but also to population density and the quality of building construction. Earthquake proofing for buildings is an essential issue in geologically unstable areas and will prevent or reduce the loss of human lives in the process. Less rigidity in buildings and a combination of flexing and tensile strength allows for more resistance to earthquakes. Lightness of the building material reduces likelihood of injuries or of people becoming trapped if the building does collapse. The most crucial parts of the house that need to be light or shockproof are the roof. The walls themselves can also be made shockproof with new structures. Modern architecture is influenced by the requirement to control greenhouse gas emissions by using solar panels, insulation, and the direction of the sun's path to maximize sun energy. Modern architecture is generally distinguished by an implementation of the belief that the resources available and practical necessities establish the effects that are produced by architecture. One of the imminent architectural fashions arising today is using construction materials such that the buildings can be sustained. Sustainable buildings incorporate the materials that are environmentally friendly. Designers focus on buildings that address the environmental concerns of the modern world. Human beings spend approximately 70% of their time in buildings on average. Therefore, even a little enhancement in efficiency can transform into substantial energy savings and environmental value. Architectural designs endeavour to incorporate solar heating and cooling in the building by a proper selection of the building direction, taking the sun path into account. Other architectural features that are considered are an excellent insulation and roofs designed to absorb rainwater instead of challenging city drainage systems. Additional future architectural fashions may incorporate agriculture into urban environments for interior or vertical farming. As former CEO and co-founder of Apple, Steve Jobs helped create products and technology that transform the way we consume music, TV, movies, and books. A creative visionary, Jobs' innovations such as the iPod and its counterpart, the online iTunes Store, revolutionized the industry and how music was distributed and purchased. Apple introduced iTunes in 2001, a few months before it would release the now ubiquitous iPod. At the time, it was not a music store, but a rip-and-burn library service only available for Mac users. It initially was viewed with great skepticism by record companies for its ability to make digital copies of music, something the industry thought would lead to piracy. When Apple rolled out iTunes for the masses in early 2003, the music industry was at a point of transition and chaos. Entering the new millennium, albums were enjoying blockbuster sales of several million units for its superstar artists, and profits were booming. Yet the threat of Napster and other forms of illegal downloading threatened to eviscerate these profits, as many music fans were starting to get used to the idea that music, and loads of it, could be free. Apple's iTunes entered into that landscape with a concept that wasn't exactly new. Yet iTunes, with its simple interface, its simple concept, 99 US cents per song, and revolutionary MP3 device, the iPod, made it the golden standard. The entry of Apple and its leader Steve Jobs into the music world was more than a success. It was a phenomenon. iTunes has redefined the listening experience and has largely become the way that music is consumed. When kids play after school, they aren't always in the same place together. Advances in video game systems and computer games allow game players to play against one another via the internet. Players can don headsets to have multi-party conversations while they play, creating a virtual group experience, while in reality, each player is alone. Some educators, scholars and scientists have expressed concerns about the effects of communication technologies. Students and professors of the Janus Project wrote a series of essays in 2009 highlighting the social, moral and ethical impacts of modern communication changes. They worry that heavy use of electronic communications, such as email, social networking, texting, instant messaging, and networked video games, has diminished kids' and adults' social skills. The advent of social networking sites and platforms such as Facebook, MySpace, Twitter and LinkedIn changed not only interpersonal communications but also marketing and business strategies. Through social networks, we stay connected to family and everyday friends, and often reunite with long-lost friends from childhood, high school and college. Social networking also allows people to share their daily lives and thoughts with one another through outbound messages and walls that signal all of their connections. Although some use social networking sites for limited communication, others spend large periods of their day communicating with contacts through both computer and mobile social networking interfaces. From the wheel to the supersonic jet, humanity has made leaps and bounds in transportation. Many people today take for granted the very means of travel available to them. Environmental design is an emerging topic in railroad technology. New low-impact electric and hybrid trains reduce overall carbon emissions. Train manufacturers have started utilising hydrogen technology for propulsion, with carbon emissions only coming from the manufacturing of the hydrogen itself. Electric trains have always had no carbon emissions because they are run entirely by internal electric motors. However, the means of generating the electricity used to power these motors was predominantly by burning fossil fuels or coal, both of which produce a large amount of carbon emissions. With the emergence of clean energy generation, electrical trains actually run with very low environmental impact. Electric vehicles and low-emission cars like the VW Blue Motion or the hybrid Toyota Prius are often labelled green cars and hailed as a technological solution to the environmental problems associated with automobiles today. Provided they run on electricity generated from renewables, electric cars do go some way toward addressing the issues of oil dependency and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as air and noise pollution from cars idling around densely populated cities. But if they run on energy generated from coal-fired power, then they merely transfer pollution from cities to rural locations and do nothing to reduce emissions. Even if they are run on renewables, the promise of green cars certainly does not address many of the more fundamental environmental, economic and social concerns associated with cars. Even if engineers were able to produce a completely green car, one that doesn't pollute at any stage of its life cycle, it would be an ineffective technological fix. In most cities, it's the sheer number of cars on city roads which provides the greatest challenge to making our cities livable. Rather than a solely technological solution focused on energy and emissions, behavioural and cultural change is necessary. This would see more emphasis on decreasing automobile dependence. In future, we should look at the way we use cars rather than just focusing on the energy they use. Aviation is one of the major transforming technologies of the modern world. In 2011, the European Commission, in close coordination with Airbus, leading European airlines and key European biofuel producers, had launched an exciting new industry-wide initiative to speed up the commercialisation of aviation biofuels in Europe. The European Advanced Biofuels Flight Path Initiative is a roadmap with clear milestones to achieve an annual production of 2 million tonnes of sustainably produced biofuel for aviation by 2020. The Biofuels Flight Path is a shared and voluntary commitment by its members to support and promote the production, storage and distribution of sustainably produced drop-in biofuels for use in aviation. It also targets establishing appropriate financial mechanisms to support the construction of industrial, first-of-a-kind advanced biofuel production plants. The US Centennial of Flight Commission was established in 1999 to encourage the broadest national and international participation in the celebration of 100 years of powered flight. It publicised and encouraged a number of programs, projects and events intended to educate people about the history of aviation.
With the end of the oil era approaching and climate change progressing faster than most models have been predicting, the utilization of space is essential not only for communications, but also for the logistics of survival through things such as weather satellites, agricultural monitoring, GPS, and climate science.
The future of space travel will probably have many different faces and will be guided by many different individuals and companies. For more than 40 years, space travel has been exclusively dominated by national governments. The problem is that a cheaper method of getting into space has not emerged. This has started to change as private entrepreneurs are starting to invest in private spacecraft and looking to expand access to space to the masses. The venture that is furthest along is Richard Branson's Virgin Galactica. This is a venture that has managed to make a private craft that can escape the Earth's atmosphere. If the trend continues, the following decades can see space travel become as affordable as taking a commercial aeroplane flight. As the decade unfolds, huge strides are expected in combating heart disease, cancer, and a host of other sicknesses that plague humanity. Biotech research holds great promise to correct many human flaws, including vulnerability to disease and telltale signs of aging. Using stem cells and genetic engineering techniques, scientists are learning to regrow damaged organs, muscles, and bones to rejuvenate damaged and aging bodies. New home monitoring systems designed to keep patients out of the hospital and get them more involved in managing their own health will revolutionise tomorrow's medical care. Improved electronic record keeping and groundbreaking innovative medical equipment also promise a bright outlook for healthcare. Futurists predict by 2020, most doctor visits will not require a personal appearance. Consultation will take place via smartphones, rarely requiring physical face-to-face visits to a physician's office. Doctors will text recommendations for diet, physical activities, and other healthcare advice directly to patients. Throughout history, advances in information and communication technologies, energy and transportation technologies, biotechnology and life sciences, agriculture and industry, weapons technologies, and other scientific technical fields have all played important roles in driving changes in the ways that men and women conduct their affairs. Given the magnitude of change that the revolution in science and technology has potential to induce, it is vitally important that we understand how this revolution has changed, is changing, and will continue to change our world. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements.